Hey, welcome to the Graceworx vlog. My name is Matt, and we are talking about how Jesus' resurrection overcomes our fears. And I thought we'd start with a big fear, and so we're going to talk today about how Jesus' resurrection overcomes the fear of death. Fear of death is completely natural for humans. It's natural because death itself is unnatural. Death is not just a part of life. Death is an intruder. The Bible calls death an enemy. We were not created in the image of God to die. We were created to live forever with God in joy and in freedom. And yet, sin, rebellion against God, brought the curse of death into creation, into life, and humans have been afraid of it ever since. Now, this fear shows up in our lives in different ways. I think some people live in desperation, in constant anxiety about the possibility of death. Some people live in depression, kind of a sad resignation to the reality that life is short and that death is unavoidable for all of us. But I think most people live in denial about death. We are afraid of it, so we do not want to think about it. We do not want to talk about it. We do not want to deal with it. And so what we do is we devise strategies so that we don't have to approach the subject of death. I think we do that subconsciously and subtly, but we definitely do that. And the Bible talks about how the fear of death, whether it's desperation or depression or denial, the fear of death is slavery. Hebrews chapter 2, 14 and 15 says this: "Since therefore the children," that's us, "share in flesh and blood, he himself," that's Jesus, "likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death," that is, the devil, "and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery." The Bible calls the fear of death lifelong slavery and says that Jesus came to free us from that. So the heartbeat of the good news, the heartbeat of the gospel is that we who believe are united to Christ in that belief, in faith, in his life, in his death, and in his resurrection. And what that means for us is that Christ's righteous life, his obedient life, substitutes for our sinful and rebellious life. That his death on the cross pays the penalty and the payment for our sin, and God's justice was poured out on Christ at the cross. And then finally, that his resurrection is our victory too. That positionally, we are raised up with and seated with Christ in the heavenly realms, Ephesians 2. And that practically we are empowered to live a new kind of life, a resurrection life, Galatians 2. And so there are three implications to the freedom that Christ has brought us through the gospel and through his resurrection over death. The first implication is the resurrection means that when death comes for you, you do not cease to exist. I think this is one of the biggest fears concerning death, because as human beings, we're created to innately know that we are supposed to go on forever. We're not supposed to cease to exist. So the thought of that is terrifying to us. But as Christians, we need not fear that we will cease to exist, because Jesus said things like, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And he who lives and believes in me shall never die." On the night before his crucifixion, Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Right, there it is again. Do not fear. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And then on the day of his crucifixion, as Christ is dying on the cross, he says to the thief beside him who has chosen to believe and has asked Jesus to remember him and to save him, Jesus says to him, "Truly I tell you, today, after we die, today you will be with me in paradise." For human beings, death is not the end. It's the beginning of an eternal future. And for Christians, for those who trust in Jesus, that future is what Jesus calls paradise. It's joy and freedom and love in the very presence of God. Second implication is that the resurrection means that death as an enemy has been defeated. Death as an enemy has been defeated. In that Hebrews 2 passage we read, it says that Jesus has destroyed the power of death, and he who held the power of death, the devil. In Romans 6, it says, if we have been united with him in a death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. And if we're united to him by faith, that means that death no longer has any dominion over us either. The resurrection robs the power of death and flips it around. It's like a Rottweiler whose teeth have been removed. So much so that Paul can say about death, we know that when we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. And we would rather be at home with the Lord and away from the body. He also said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. And I would rather depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. If we have trusted in Jesus Christ, death as an enemy for us has been defeated, and it's been flipped around so that even though death desires something evil for us, it just opens the door to something incredible and wonderful, and that's God's presence forever. And the third implication that we see in the resurrection of Jesus for our fear of death is that the resurrection means that we too will be raised. I want to read to you from 1 Corinthians 15. It says this, in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. For by a man, that's Adam, came death. By a man, that's Christ, has also come the resurrection from the dead. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? What is sown is perishable. What is raised? Imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? For the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through Jesus Christ. See, the resurrection and the gospel are not just about souls. It is about whole persons, about soul and body. It's about the whole of creation, the entire universe being redeemed by the work of Jesus Christ, by his obedient life and his atoning death and his victorious resurrection. The empty tomb means victory for Christ over the death of our souls and over the death of our bodies, and that we will be raised with him. He is making all things new. Now look, these are glorious truths, and none of them means that we now need to be friendly with death. We still ought to be opposed to death. It is still an enemy to be defeated. We ought to grieve death. We ought to long for the day when death is no more. But as Christians, we don't need to fear it, because we have the victory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Thanks for listening.